Welcome to the UN House and the second session of Bhutan Dialogues. I'm Gerald Daly, the UNRC here in Bhutan, and I'm also the RR for UNDP. There are two free future learning opportunities which I would like to share with you today. The first is a proposal writing for resource mobilisation workshop for half a day on 21 November, which the CSOs are invited to. The second one is a CSO resource mobilisation workshop on 4 December, and this workshop will address challenges CSOs are facing in funding proposals and their preparation. We have a handout on these, and Liam, can you hold up your hand? Liam has a little handout available for anybody who's particularly interested in either of these opportunities. Bhutan is an extremely rare example of a peaceful transition to a democracy. Most young democracies are plagued with violence, corruption and instability, but Bhutan seems to be an exception. However, corruption can affect any country at any stage of development and is something to watch for carefully. This highlights the importance of the work of Bhutan Transparency Initiative, a CSO which helps prevent and fight corruption in this country. Today we are joined by Aum Pema Lhamo, Executive Director of Bhutan Transparency Initiative. Aum Pema has a long career in civil service, spanning over 30 years, involving a number of positions, including English and economics teacher, chairperson of the Public Accounts Committee and the Good Governance Committee, and a member of the National Council of Bhutan representing Shamgang Dzongkhag in the First Parliament. Aum Pema is a person who is driven to do all she can to improve Bhutanese society. Our host is Dr. Karma Punso, founder and president of Loden Foundation. Karma is so well known, and in the first dialogue I gave an extensive overview of his CV. So for today I chose to take an extract from an interview he did in the fairly recent past. The question that was posed to him was, let's talk about your initiative with the Loden Foundation. It was a perfect example of Bodhisattva philosophy being implemented. How did you do it? And Karma's response was, you put it across rather grandly by calling it a Bodhisattva initiative. Yes, the inspiration definitely comes from Bodhisattva ethics and morality. It is something that I wanted to do, partly to repay the kindness to the teachers who have imparted their Bodhisattva idioms to me and others. It started basically as a small token to help others get the opportunity I got. I had the opportunity and luxury of exploring a diverse range of education systems. So while I was at Oxford, I befriended a potter who was a Welsh ex-policeman, and during one of our conversations he told me of how his missing education was very difficult for him, and he wanted to help someone get the schooling he didn't. That was how Loden Foundation started. Finally, I want to thank you all for your attendance. Please join us afterwards for tea and coffee, and I welcome Aum Pema and Dr. Karma to the stage.
Welcome to the second session of Bhutan Dialogues. We envisage this forum, this space, as a space for critical thinking, but civil conversations. A platform where we can ask tough questions, but with humility, to stretch our boundaries further. Ways to refine our own ideas and practices that we have concerning our pursuit of progress. And we have seen Bhutan go through tremendous progress in the past half century or so, and you have lived and seen through this process of development. In fact, we were at the forefront of a lot of things happening in the country. So it's a great honor for us to have you. We have also been once a lecturer in communication, so a perfect fit for our civil dialogues. So to begin with, I would like to ask you if you have any personal experience or events in your life that has really launched you in the direction that you took and made you who you are today.
First of all, I'd like to thank UN and Bhutan Commission for giving me this opportunity to participate in this Bhutan Dialogues. For me, this will be a very profound experience today. And secondly, I'd also like to extend a very good evening to all those who are gathered here today. And with this, as much as I hope to be at home, I'm sure that there will be a lot of limitations in what I can offer as a part of the dialogue. So please do bear with me. And for me, it will be a learning experience as well as sharing my own experiences. So to answer Doctor's first statement, life, I think, for everybody has a lot of experiences, and I think to shape an individual, to bring an individual to stand to a position or place where that individual is an accumulation of many experiences. But this is what I feel. And even for me, in my life, I've gone through a lot of experiences. And I think an experience, whether it is sometimes positive, sometimes negative, but all these contribute to the growth of an individual. So where I am today, I am working as an executive director for Bhutan Transparency initiative. And I would like to focus a little bit and see how I came to be leading this organization. I think an experience that I had as a member of parliament serving the National Council, and specifically as a member as well as chairperson for two very important committees, the Good Governance Committee as well as the Public Accounts Committee. It was a very big eye-opening for me, because there I got to understand the systems, and particularly in relation to a lot of lapses in the governance in our country. So this is how I thought, like, by starting a very small organization mandated or focused on enhancing governance through increased transparency as well as accountability, would contribute in a very small way but effectively to enhancing governance in our country.
Yes, so before we get further into governance and transparency issues, I remember you telling me that you're a jack of many trades, and there must have been many things that you've done even before you became a parliamentarian. I'd like to know a little more about what really what kind of experiences and education, careers that build on to lead you to your current work.
It is a jack of all trades, or many trades, as Dr. rightly mentioned. I think throughout my life, if I look at it, started, I think, since a child as a learner. And then after graduation, I was much interested in teaching, so I joined the teaching profession. So I started my career from Shimlan High School way back in 1986. I'm sure some of you were not even born. That's how long back I go. And then so as a teacher, and then for a few years, my teaching in the school, high school, was quite short-lived, because then I was transferred to the Ministry of Agriculture and tasked to help in the establishment of the present CNR, which was then NRTI. So right from inception, I was there for 10 years, served as a lecturer in communications, as Dr. rightly said. And then after that, again 10 years of career, and then in 2000, I was transferred to Bhutan to look after the information and communication for Ministry of Agriculture. I served there as program director for another 7-8 years before I resigned from the civil service to join the 2008 elections. So that's how I have moved on. And I think jack of many trades is, I think, like a mother, because I'm a mother of 3 boys, an educator, a learner, a manager, a legislator. I've had a hand and experience in many of these things. And now finally I'm again in a totally different environment, which is the NGO or the civil society organization. But I must say I'm not a professional in any of this.
Well, I think you're being very modest. Now, to go on to governance, you have started Bhutan Transparency initiative, focused on good governance. Good governance also happens to be one of the 4 pillars of cross-national happiness that Bhutan seeks as a development goal. Can you tell us about good governance? In very simple layman's terms, what it exactly is? What is really good governance?
This is a very difficult subject. In one way, it is too broad, but in another way also, I think it is quite specific. Governance, I think, literally is defined in many different ways, but what I would like to, as Dr. mentioned, in very simple terms is management of inputs versus outputs. This is what governance really means. But good governance, again, has to have is built on certain elements, founding cornerstones like governance that is responsive, that is inclusive, that is transparent, that is accountable, and rule of law that is cohesive. So all this, I think, there are parameters which define what good governance is. But at the end of the day, in a nutshell, good governance is better processes or management styles which yields efficient outputs and delivers better services to the public. This is what I feel.
Thank you. That's a very complex definition to make this. It has so many different components, but let's dwell on transparency to begin with, because that is part of the nature of your initiative. The Transparency International Index indicates that Bhutan is 65th in score, so 0 being absolutely full of corruption and 100 being totally clean. Bhutan stands at 65, and I think that has been the case in 2014, 2015, and 2016 consistently. In terms of ranking, I think it was 27th, as you said. So, do you think this international ranking truly reflects the real situation? Is Bhutan's transparency status as good as the Transparency International Index indicates?
Yes. The Transparency International is a global CSO based in Berlin, and then it started the corruption perception index or in corruption ranking systems in 1995. And then every time about 100 and over, around 100 countries are assessed. And the assessment is done based on certain international reports, renowned reports prepared by World Bank, ADB and other organizations. So the index for Bhutan has been gradually improving ever since Bhutan became a part of that assessment or ranking. And I think at one point we were at 39. We were at 39th position among 165 countries or so. But of late, Bhutan has improved a lot in the ranking and managed to be ranked as 27th cleanest country globally, with a score of, as rightly mentioned, 65, which indicates that Bhutan is comparatively a clean country. Now that is the global index. But as a Bhutanese, if we look at the corruption status today, how clean is Bhutan? I mean, the question is how clean are we as a country? If we look at all these indices, reports, I think Bhutan seems to be doing fairly well. The happiness index, and then the ease of doing business also for a small country, I think we are performing well and we should be quite proud as Bhutanese. However, if we look at the internal systems ourselves, I think Bhutan still has a long way to go in cleaning our own systems, also cleaning ourselves. Because although 27th being the rank globally and one of the top countries in the Asian region, South Asia, we are one of the cleanest. However, I think we should not be complacent. There's a lot of sweeping and cleaning to be done. Because I think the perception of the Bhutanese ourselves when it comes to corruption, based on a survey that we conducted, which is Corruption Perceptions Survey, is quite alarming, because almost, I think, more than 65% of our population or respondents still think that corruption is on the rise. So therefore, since we have not really measured our own assessment against the TI, the perception index, at this moment in time, I will not be able to exactly say how they equate or how they measure up to each other. But all I can say is, based on our own small survey that we did nationally, I think as Bhutanese, there's a lot that we all must do to make Bhutan cleaner now.
So, we're exactly talking about corruption perception, not corruption per se, the perception of corruption. And that leads on to a very complex, complicated question of what is really corruption? What do we perceive as corruption? Because in some countries, things may be considered totally non-corrupt, when in another country, a different culture, that same practice might be seen as a totally corrupt practice. So how do we understand corruption, especially for young people who talk about corruption and anti-corruption? What exactly is corruption? I think there is quite a lot of types of corruption, active corruption, passive corruption. How do you suggest, how would you advise the Bhutanese to perceive corruption?
Very good question. I think, yes, corruption is defined, I think, differently by various scholars as well as in different literatures. But for us, what our basis for the definition of corruption is based more on the Transparency International's definition. And what constitutes or institutes corruption is also defined by the Anti-Corruption Act 2007 and Amendment 2011. So we base it on that, and I think in the Anti-Corruption Act of Bhutan 2011 amendment also, there are about 9 activities that are defined as corrupt practices. But basically what corruption is taking abuse of authority or power or position. I think that is what corruption would basically comprise of.
But most of the Bhutanese seem to only see active corruption, such as abuse of power, misappropriation of public resources. What about passive corruption, where civil servants or public servants don't perform the duties they ought to perform, when NGOs don't fulfill the duties and targets they ought to do.
I'd like to give a little bit of background on this, and also just to strengthen maybe what I would be speaking on. I think Bhutan, being a very unique country, we also have a very unique societal fabric, which I think impedes the fight against corruption also. Because if, on one hand, if you look at the smallness of the population size, people would think that, oh, it should be easy, it should be possible to handle a population of few 100,000, 700, 800,000 now, I would say. But on the other side, on the other hand, especially for those people who are engaged in the fight against corruption or improving, enhancing governance, I think this very close-knit social fabric has been acting as a strong deterrent in the fight against corruption, because of fear, the way things are, it's very intricate. So where is the spot, the soft spot, the pressure points? It's so difficult to feel. Where is the corruption? Is it at the top level? Is it with the administrators? Is it with the private sector? Is it with citizens at large, for that matter? Why not? Even the citizens can be corrupt. So it would not be right to exclude everybody else and say that corruption is only in the public service. I think it extends beyond just the public institutions. Because I think governance is not just also confined to the government. Governance initially, I think, was till 1980s was referred mostly to government. But since 1980s, I think there are other definitions and views that governance includes three things, three bodies, arms. And that is the public, as the private, and the NGOs, civil societies. But in today's context, if in our country, it's just the five fingers all pointing to the government and thinking that you are not a part of governance. So therefore, in this regard, I think in Bhutan, tackling corruption has its own challenges, very different from most. People see corruption, people don't like corruption, but people don't want to react, take action on that. This is our main problem now. And they think that it should be the task only of the institutions like the Royal Audit Authority or the Anti-Corruption Commission to fight corruption. So this is a huge challenge.
So to me, you raise two distinct important issues. One is about the small society. I think this is a concern. In the last session, we were discussing about media freedom and how this small society mentality is hindering that. It seems that same small society mindset also hinders Bhutan's fight against corruption. The second one you, of course, raised is governance beyond the government. I'll come back to that. But if we were to discuss this issue of this close-knit small society mindset, it seems that transparency isn't enough to tackle corruption. That in a small society, in fact, things are very transparent, either through the official sources or through non-official sources. We get to know about who is corrupt and who is not corrupt. But it is really in the procedures of penalization, the procedures of bringing retribution to those who are corrupt, that we have to rely ultimately to address the issue of corruption. So that leads to accountability. How is Bhutan faring? What can we do to enhance accountability? Because I think we all know that there are some people who are corrupt and who in fact flaunt their positions of power, how they can get away from the arms of the law, and have no enjoy full impunity. So how do we go about doing this impunity and also this enhancing the culture of accountability?
I think this is the problem. You have hinted on the need, Doctor, because I think transparency, to talk a little bit on transparency in Bhutan, I think while Doctor, you yourself said that it's quite transparent. Because if information is not passed through the official channels, information gets around through the informal channels. But the problem here is, the big danger I foresee in Bhutan is, if the public channels for information sharing are not relaxed, or is not opened, then I think the chances of the informal medium picking up and taking, like the role of information, coming as a channel to communicate information, there could be a lot of danger because there can be a lot of distortion of information. And this is something we have to be very wary and therefore push for a more transparent information sharing system from the public institutions itself. Because people cannot, I think, it is very difficult to differentiate between fake and real facts. So if the fake news captures the audience, I think, or the citizens, then this could be very risky for a democracy in a small country like ours. So therefore, the public formal transparency has to be enhanced. Today, I think, although we do not have a Right to Information Act, which I think many other countries now in the world have, and then it's also mandated that Bhutan should have a Right to Information Act because we have ratified the UNCAC, and that's one of the mandatory things that a country needs to do. But Bhutan still do not have a Right to Information Act. But I think the government till now has been quite liberal with sharing of information, but we need to be more open now. And then when we talk of accountability, how can you hold anybody to account if you do not have the right information? So accountability, transparency, in my mind, or to me, are very closely related and dependent on each other. So therefore, if you look at today, some people voice their dissatisfaction with the way corruption investigations are handled or complaints are managed, but through social media. But if why? Because they do not have they are not sure whether it's fake, whether it's a fact. But if this information, if the formal, the public institutions are transparent, I think then people know that the information they receive is factual and they can react better. So accountability can be enhanced. But in today, currently in Bhutan, while the ACC is doing a great job now with their investigations and prosecutions, all these things, but the ACC alone cannot, fulfill or reduce corruption on its own. Now, if everybody takes your own responsibility and hold anybody accountable, with the simplest thing, a traffic policeman whom you see on the road standing, trying to manage the traffic as well as the public, if you see the traffic policeman letting, this is what people perceive, the traffic policeman let big cars go and don't fine, but small cars they'll fine. If you see your responsibility is hold that traffic policeman to account. Point it out and say that we have done this.
You also have people in the big car who actually flaunt their powers, their positions, and in fact harass the policeman. So who should you hold accountable for such acts? The policeman or the one who is actually breaking the law, disregarding the policeman?
This is very interesting for me because Firstly, I think the public pressure, we do not have that much of that in Bhutan. Anybody sees also, you will just turn your head and say like it's not my business, or you'll walk away. But if everybody makes it your responsibility to uphold the rule of law or the laws of the country, then I think the regulators will be forced to implement it properly. And then once, twice, public shaming, even the big individual in the big car, as you see. But nowadays, the bigger people travel in smaller cars. This is also an information.
But this just came.
So public pressure, I think. If you see somebody, a big person harassing a police officer or a policeman, I think you should have that, courage to intervene. Although it is very difficult. That is why I say it's the small society syndrome, because you fear the backlash.
And this is something that we regularly see, in fact, as a trend on social media platforms, that when the official channels, when the mainstream media platforms don't hold somebody who has been corrupt or who has broken a law accountable, when they cannot take the process of retribution forward, public try to shame and name such people on social media. Then we again have the challenge of the social media not being able to verify the facts from the fake. So we can end up having people sometimes being named and shamed for wrong reasons. Sometimes we have cases of even mistaken identities. So unless we have a structured official process of holding people accountable, and of course ACC is doing what it can. What other ways can Bhutanese adopt? From your work, what should be the steps we should take to enhance accountability, make it better than what it is today?
To me, the very simple solution, or the most difficult, but the most difficult to implement, is public voice. We have to empower the citizens. We have to have a transparent system. And then only I think the public can also demand that. We need to engage the citizens in the starting from decisions like policies, legislations. I think it is very important, because how can a citizen who has not been included in the shaping of a policy and enactment of a law, consultations have not been, how can that individual be aware of what is the right thing, what does the law say? So in a situation where the people are ignorant of the existing policies and what it means, I think it will be very difficult for the public to also help strengthen accountability. And when it comes to the institutions responsible for accountability, like the Royal Audit Authority, and then also the Anti-Corruption Commission, and then perhaps upholding the rule of law, that's the judiciary, So they are, now if we just leave only to these institutions have their own prescribed procedures. But these procedures, I think, cannot cover. They will just indulge and also look into matters that come to their table. But what does not come there are overlooked. And in fact, I think many get sieved through the processes. And also, if every small thing, if these institutions had to do, I think then 50% of the population might have to be engaged in these public institutions. So therefore, I just think that engagement of citizens at all levels of governance is the only solution.
So, Of course, when you say governance, you're talking about organizations in all sense. That you earlier mentioned how governance should go beyond the government. This is one area where I think we should discuss, spend some time, that today the state is the main driver of Bhutan's economy. But if you were to sustain the development and growth, the private sector has to become the main driver. And for that, we need the private sector to be non-corrupt, to be ethical. How do we engage the private sector, the ordinary business persons, and bring them to the table to help them also think about building a corruption-free society? What can the Bhutanese do? What steps can we take to engage the private sector?
The private sector, yes. I think steps are already being taken, even under the leadership of the Anti-Corruption Commission. Integrating in business or private sector has already been initiated, and then I think trainings or knowledge sharing resources in that area has already been developed. The state and the private sector, I think in Bhutan, the private sector does have a big role to play. But bigger than that is also the role of everyday citizens. Because private sector is so small, that's my thinking now. And then private sector alone cannot also complement the initiatives of the state in Bhutan's development. I think we also need to rope in other institutions, both formal as well as informal, like citizen groups, civil societies, NGOs, all this. I think that is very important and an integral part for good progressive development that will benefit the welfare or contribute to the welfare of the people as envisioned in our happiness. I think the GNH, the planning process is...
Talking about GNH, I'm sorry to interrupt you. There is the GNH for Business conference going on. It's been going on for the last 3 days. And in their initial survey of Bhutanese business houses, about 45 business houses that they tried to evaluate to see if they fulfill the GNH for Business, I read that there was not even a single one that scored an average. So we are looking at a very poor situation as far as business ethics is concerned.
So I think this is very interesting because today, if you really look at the private sector, they are not accountable now. Who holds private businesses accountable and for what? I think has been a question. And then from the public institutions, I think they are trying to promote ethical conduct, integrity, and also improving the public-private partnership. But in reality, it's very rare that any private businesses thus far has been held accountable. So in the absence of accountability on private sector, I think private businesses, the integrity, it will never improve. And I'm not surprised that this study revealed, the standard of the private sector. But for the private sector also, I think to be able to fulfill this ethical conduct and integrity, be accountable, and provide partnership to the development of our country. I think our private sector needs a lot of hand-holding from the government at the moment. This is my personal feeling. And sometimes one tends to think that maybe the private sector is too pampered because they are given tax holidays, soft loans, this and that, and then a lot of small, what do you call this, scale, like businesses, they get a lot of support. But again, if you look at it, is it enough? What needs to be done to the private sector? It's not new. I think a decade ago, even when I was in the civil service, private sector as a growth of Bhutan's, like engine of Bhutan's economic development was the slogan, and then I think a lot of support was supposed to be extended to the private sector. But 10 years down the line, even when we look at the private sector today, we feel that it's just those businesses that were there are still there and doing well. But many other small businesses, I think, are still struggling. So when a business is struggling, how can you enforce or trust them to be ethical and to conduct themselves with integrity? So it's sort of a catch-22 situation.
I want to ask you a cultural, a structural question regarding transparency and accountability. I was reading a book called Reinventing Organizations, and that more or less lists the various phases of organizational culture we have gone through history, of how we have evolved from sort of caveman, hunter-gatherer culture with the alpha male using sheer physical force to control a unit, to a more organized, primitive, or medieval society, which is very feudalistic organizations, going on further to a more modern corporate organizations. And then the future really being envisaged to be an organization or a system of governance where we should be all democratic, a very egalitarian system. But then, if that is what we need for a corruption-free, a very transparent, accountable, efficient governance, when we look at Bhutan's cultural structure, system, we are deeply rooted in a hierarchical structure. We have lots of official insignias, lots of behaviors that constantly remind us of the hierarchies. How can we reconcile these two? Of having a very hierarchical system and yet seeking a very transparent, equitable, efficient governance. Do you think there is a scope?
This is a very difficult question. I don't know, I can only talk based on my own experience. I think we are slowly, although like all this hierarchy is there, apparent, and insignias are there. But the Bhutanese culture is evolving, I think, because 10 years, when we were young officers, the moment we see a red scarf officer, we used to literally feel so, like not scared, but like uneasy. We could not even look straight at face and talk to them. Leave aside the orange scarves, the libos. But today, if you look at like the reactions and also the interactions, I think this gap has really diminished. Not as much as we would like to see, but it has diminished. And therefore, my personal thinking is perhaps just because we are a democracy, I think the hierarchy is there in every society. Certain hierarchy has to be there, because otherwise it will become like a story that once, when, I don't know whether it is true or not, but there used to be a joke when Nepal became a democratic country, that there was a joke that the sweeper used to refuse to sweep because he used to say, this is democracy, why don't you sweep? The tea, the office assistant refused to serve tea because he said, this is democracy, go and get your own tea. So democracy, I think, should not be perceived or conceived that everybody is equal and everybody should be doing the same job. I think certain hierarchy is important. And in Bhutan, the insignia, yes, the companies, the different colors. this sometimes makes you feel that why do we need that? A Duncan is a Duncan with or without his company. It's a job that he has to do. So perhaps a little bit of thought in this, how to, change this sort of system will be very useful in enhancing proper democratic processes. But I think it will be a long time before we can totally do away with this system. But we can always make a start with democratic processes, putting the processes in place, and that I think what is democracy? It is, yes, love. So democracy is the citizen engagement. I feel people have to be aware. The choices that are there, people have to be engaged. So discussions, discourses are very important. And as long as we engage the people meaningfully, I think we still have a scope for Bhutan to have a very vibrant democracy. So this is just my
I was struck
opinion.
by the relationship between democracy and the ranking on Transparency International's Corruption Index, that the vast majority of the countries that ranked in the top 20 were actually sort of socialist democratic countries of North Europe or North America. So it occurred to me that maybe transparency and accountability works better in a very egalitarian democratic society than a hierarchical one. But my last question, you mentioned to me the other day about how important self-governance is in promoting good governance. I would like you to share a few tips on how we can enhance self-governance as individuals, as private citizens.
I believe as an individual that, because as I mentioned earlier, I think governance is not just government, it goes beyond government. And that also when we look at private sector governance, private sector, public sector as well, and the NGOs. The private sector would also include, I think, the household level. And as individuals, we belong to the smallest institution, which is the family. And then even the development of a family depends on how each individual member of the family conducts oneself. The higher transparency, accountability, and integrity present in a family, I think that family is much happier than another family that does not have all these things. So therefore, self-governance, I think, as an individual, reflections. If you cannot conduct yourself with integrity, how can you demand that others conduct with integrity? If you cannot be subjected to accountability, how can you demand accountability to be accepted from others? If you are not transparent, if you are opaque, and you don't want to share, how can you expect? So I think these are very important, and as individuals, we have to, it is difficult, it will be difficult, but make concerted efforts to do these reflections. And if every individual does that, then I think we don't need the Anti-Corruption Commission, we don't need the Royal Audit Authority, we do not need the judiciary to do all this, because then things will fall in its place. So this is what I think, this is my...
So on that very positive note of being totally clean society, let me invite questions from the audience as well.
Let me thank Tasho for your very insightful talk on good governance relating to your wide range of personal experience, which made the talk even more enriching. Thank you so much. Listening to you, Tasho, I understand that transparency is one of the crucial components of good governance. And one way to be transparent is by engaging people, engaging stakeholders, which I think you have mentioned clearly, as much as possible in every aspect of decision-making process to ensure a one-way kind of plan. And the trend I see personally is that people, including the civil society organizations, we are usually called not really for consultation, but to listen to what they have already decided, listen to their verdict, to which I think CSOs, even the individuals, they simply do not have time to listen to what is being already decided. So my question to you, Dasho, as you, I think Dr. Okama and two of you discussed, owing to our very small society, very conservative and hierarchical society, I think we are just beginning to adapt to the culture of challenging and questioning our superiors, our boss. So what should be the way forward to break through this cultural stereotype to address this issue? This is my question one. Maybe if I may be allowed, maybe my second question to you. The other crucial component, most important component of good governance, you said, is equitability and inclusiveness in making sure that every sections of the society, such as vulnerable groups, are involved in the decision-making process. Because Dasho, you have been as a civil servant, as a teacher, and finally as a member of the National Council, the upper house. How much of that consultation in your capacity as an MP, how much of active consultation have you done with the public, especially with the vulnerable groups? And what would be your evaluation? Are we living up to these principles, the very important principles of the good governance? Thank you.
Thank you, Duji, for asking very pertinent questions, and I hope I'll be able to provide you with answers that's befitting your questions. The first question on inclusiveness and how to enhance. I have very short memory, please, you'll have to help me. How to break through this hierarchy, because many feel that there's not enough consultation processes taking place.
Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes.
On one hand, what I think is also like, do our citizens have the capacity first? You look at now democracy, and then the most important, I think, the cornerstones in Bhutan is the local government. And if we look at our local governments today, are they adequately empowered to engage productively in consultations? I feel that, I don't know whether I should say the government is not, or whether I should say everybody, all involved in Bhutan's governance is doing enough, because the capacity of the local governments is still marginally low, I would like to say. And in such a space, I think even to have productive consultations, it might not really be effective. So the equality and the equity aspect of it is another aspect. I was quite shocked to hear, I have not seen the report myself, but somebody told me that according to an ADB report, Bhutan has been identified as the least equal country globally, wherein 50% of the expenditure is made by about 5% of the population. So we have been identified, I think the report has identified Bhutan as the most unequal country. While we can say that if Bhutan is a very equal country, I think the inequity in Bhutan is still very large. So when there is inequity, what I feel is, I think the consultation is important, because today it is more, although we say we are very democratic, I think most of the decisions are top-down still. The 12th five-year plan is supposed to be the people's plan, but how rightly, is it really people's plan? How much consultation has been done? I have my own doubts. So therefore, I think there's this mismatch between demand and supply. Our policies, everything, I think, focuses so much on equality, but very little on equity. Just because you said we are, equity was one of the things you said. So therefore, I think to be really democratic and to be really engaging, the empowerment of the vast majority of the Bhutanese is yet to be done. I feel it's not adequately done. And then even if you look at even the private sector just now in Bhutan is captured by a few big business houses. Which then you look at unemployment, the employment, the rural, urban. I don't know the policies. I think consultation, adequate discourses, in my opinion, is our weakness even today. So how to go about that, I think I don't have a solution to that, but I think each of us, we could try, even through as CSOs, start with our own institution. When you are developing your programs, why don't we start consulting our beneficiaries, the clients, which we also don't do. We think we know all and then we just put a program and go to them and see, this is how we should do. And we are so good in impressing the donors with very, I think, articulate plans. But is it really effective? So we can start it with the CSOs, and then I think it will go on to the others. And then the last question was a very personal question to me, and I'm ashamed to say that as a legislator, we passed many laws, acts during our tenure, but I'm ashamed to say that very little consultation with the people. Very little. And yet we call them that everything is done in consultation with the people. Sad but true. So this is, I hope I've answered your question.
My question is on good comments. If I'm not mistaken, that the role of actually happiness is the mainstream of the generation, and because the role of happiness in the public sphere in Bhutan, if I'm not mistaken, it was happened long back ago, which was written in the legal code of Bhutan. If government cannot create a happiness to its people, there is no purpose of government to exist. Anyway, but I heard many Buddhist people say that monarchy is better than democracy, because as you all know that democracy came through not the will of the king, not the will of the people, but the will of the king. And many say that after becoming becoming a democracy in Bhutan, we saw many corruption cases happening in our country. So, do you really foresee, how do you foresee that after changing the government, after changing the ruling government, and after the Prime Minister, Minister, do you really, how do you foresee that corruption really goes down as it goes up? Because we need the transparency, accountability, and effectiveness, the mainstream trust of the good governments in Bhutan. Because the FNC accountability and FNC have long been as an integral part of the government and political system in Bhutan. So, because that if you cannot create happiness for the people, for the public, and how do you see that the changing of system of government from monarchy to democracy, and after the 5 years, we have again election and change the government. Do you really foresee that the corruption really goes down or not?
Thank you. What was your name?
My name is Aum.
So let me see if I got your question correctly. I think you asked one on happiness, how this transition of governments can assure happiness is, that is one. And how corruption can be reduced.
Always corruption is still in the economy.
Has corruption been reduced?
Already corruption. How do you foresee the future?
And how do I foresee the future? I see a very bright future. Happiness, to me, is very complex, because it is also, I find that it is a very abstract, and I don't like to vouch on discussions on such things where I'm not competent. I can only talk about my own happiness, which again is subject to many different environments. So whether people are happy or not, I think there are surveys GLH has done. I think that should, as official reports are there, and then the happiness index. I'm sure these will give you more insights on how happy people are. But I think coming to the form of government, in my opinion, I think there is no government, right government. I think the type and form of governance would depend largely on who leads the leadership. So therefore, I think Bhutan has been very fortunate to have had leaders like our monarch in the past. But democracy, again, it's inevitable, I think, because the transition is inevitable. So therefore, I think this was again the wisdom and the foresight of the fourth king, who first saw this and then gifted democracy to the people. Now, how do we handle this democracy? How do we treasure this gift? How do we use this gift? Is it again falls on the citizens, like you, me, everybody. And corruption, it's surprising because what you're saying is right. In the perception survey that we did, it also highlights that corruption is on the rise in Bhutan after the introduction of democracy. We asked a very specific question: has corruption increased or decreased after the introduction of democracy? And surprisingly, I'm not sure about the exact percentage, but majority think that corruption is on the rise. But there has not been, again, following studies to really corroborate the findings, because that was just a perception survey. One would be the number of complaints that the ECC is receiving, the corruption complaints that the ECC is receiving. But that also cannot really indicate that it is on the rise. But the perception is corruption is on the rise. But the reasons could also be that now people are more aware of corruption inland, and that it is a crime. The awareness of people on corruption, I think, is a factor also, which is good, because people have to be worried about corruption. We cannot be complacent. So this, the citizens, when they worry, then they will start asking questions. And while there may be so many different ways of fighting corruption or trying to reduce corruption, I think one is the systemic corruptions. In a hierarchical society, I think it came earlier also, like us. I think first is to strengthen, tighten loopholes. We cannot have an airtight system, foolproof, corruption-free system, but I think we have to start with systemic corrections, awareness. People have to be educated on their responsibilities, what is corruption. So then only, I think, if we are successful in advocating, creating awareness, strengthening our systems, then I think it should not be very difficult for Bhutan to be as clean, but we have to work harder to achieve, because I think our commitment is 20th position by 2020. And that's a real tough challenge. It's already 2017. we have only 3 years, 20th position, so 7 ranks. And this is again, it's not our own ranks. It is in, it has in comparison to other countries. If other countries do better, we have to work even harder. But I think it would be quite right or okay for me to say that the future of Bhutan in corruption is not as gloomy as we think it is. I think things are happening. People are more aware, and I think collectively we will be able to, if not improve the situation, but not get worse than what we are already.
My question may not be directly on transparency, but I think it actually is. So one of the issues that interests me a lot is women in leadership positions. For example, we know now that approximately 8% of executive positions within the government are held by women. So there would seem to be what is called a large gap in terms of women in leadership positions. We don't know the statistics from business, private sector, but perhaps they're in the same range, around approximately 8%. Do you believe if we were to further promote women into leadership positions, would that strengthen transparency? Would that be an improvement in what we're talking about this afternoon, or would it not necessarily be an impacting issue? Any particular view? Part of the reason why I'm asking this question, I was having a conversation with somebody recently, and they said, it's surprising the number of women that are leading CSOs here in Bhutan. It's surprising. So this comment made me just think about what's going on here. Women are feeling that they can have a strong voice when it comes to the CSO community, but not necessarily within government positions, or perhaps not even within the business sector. So I'm interested in your general thoughts on this. Aum.
Thank you. I'd also like to throw back this question to our audience. Would that impact if we had, having more women in leadership positions? Would this impact transparency or in the reduction of corruption? This is something that I think it's a discussion that is quite common at many tables, be it at home or even in the offices. Why there are so few women at leadership, at leadership positions. And then we also ask the question, are women cleaner than men as managers? I can only base my statement just now on what my own experience. We used to think that women are much cleaner. That's why one time in 2006, when we were doing this the civil service, we were promoting or lobbying for more women to be put in the AFTs because they were so corrupt, the administrative and finance division. In fact, the AFTs were known as, people used to say, ask and forget division. So ineffective because these positions were all occupied by men. There was not a single woman in that position in the administration, leave alone secretaries, directors. But there's been quite a lot of, I think, women now climbing up this ladder of leadership positions. And I think few examples that we see is that Tsirang Dzongda is going to be first woman Dzongda. She's doing fantastic. Then the second one is Dharma Dzongda, and I hope she will do equally well. Look at the Anti-Corruption Commission. The chairperson is a woman. One of the commissioners is a woman. Why? Is it by design default? Ask. Election Commission, woman. But in the government, at the secretariat level, we still do not have a female. We have one female secretary. two eyes. So I would just like to say that, do you see better with one eye or do you see better with both eyes open? I think for me, if I close one eye and just look with one eye, things are a little bit hazy. But if I open both my eyes, I think the focus is clear. So this is how I would like to respond to your answer. Thank you. To your question.
Yes, thank you. I have one last question to ask you. I think we'll have to stretch it by a minute or so. Bhutan Dialogues is offering you 2 books from the New York Times International Bestsellers list. Which 2 books did you choose and why?
I have to apologize. I've been reminded of that by
Yeah.
I've not had the time to choose. Because I could not make up my mind. I went through the books once, I could not make up my mind. So give me some time and I will choose. I've not been able to choose them.
That's thank you. I can choose it for you. You don't want me to choose for you. That was a joke.
I will present it for you.
Well, this is the conclusion of our second session of Bhutan Dialogues, and I want to thank you and also the audience for joining us. This is really a space for us to have critical civil conversations, a space we hope to use to refine our ideas of development or practice of implementation of development projects, and most importantly to come together and think and learn. And I hope you have learned, I hope you have thought better, a bit better. Last time I concluded by sharing a Buddhist adage saying civility is mark of learning, purity of thought is mark of meditation. Today I would like to share another one which comes from the corpus of the Bodhisattva doctrines. It goes, learning makes one see the truth. Learning makes one eschew the evil. Töbe chönam sheparju, töbe digle toparju. I think this is quite appropriate to the forum where we try to learn and think, and also eschew the corrupt. That is the theme of today's session. So thank you all once again. We hope to see you again next month, same time, same date, same venue, to discuss, to think and to learn together. Thank you.